Look at this house. Number 4. Little whinging. At first glance, it is the most boring place on earth. A perfectly manicured lawn, not a speck of dust on the windowsills. A silence that rings in your ears. But if you look closer, you won't see comfort. You will see panic. This sterility is unnatural. It is a barricade. Every straight line of the fence, every identical scheduled dinner, these are bricks in a wall that two people spent years building. They didn't build it to keep out burglars or the taxman. They built it to keep out what flows in the blood of the lady of the house's own sister. We are used to thinking of Vernon and Petunia Dursley as cartoon villains. People who hated Harry Potter simply because they were bad people. That is a lie. They didn't hate him. They were terrified of him. Their cruelty was not sadism, but a reflex spasm. An attempt to burn out an infection with a hot iron. But to understand how ordinary people turn into jailers for a child, we need to rewind the tape. Back to a time when no cupboard under the stairs existed yet. To the time when Petunia Evans made a fatal mistake. A mistake that turned her love into poison. In every story about a chosen one, there is always the one who wasn't chosen. In the Evans family, that shadow was Petunia. Imagine, your younger sister can make flowers bloom in her palm. She can jump off a swing and float gently in the air. And you? You just stand there. You are a spectator in the front row of someone else's show. The Evans parents adored Lily. They were proud to have a witch in the family. And every one of their delighted, "Oh, Lily?" was a quiet blow to Petunia's self-esteem. But here is the key moment that many movie fans miss. Petunia wasn't born hating magic. At 11 years old, she did something that defined her destiny forever. She sat at a desk, took a quill, and wrote a letter to Albus Dumbledore. She didn't curse him, she begged him. "Please take me too. I want to be there too." Dumbledore's reply was polite but firm. "No. You are a muggle. You don't belong there." It was in that moment that Petunia's heart hardened. Psychologists call this the sour grapes defense mechanism. If you can't reach the grapes, you convince yourself they are sour and rotten. If she can't be a witch, then magic is a disease. It is a deformity. It is something decent people should be ashamed of. She needed to fill this void inside urgently. She needed to become the queen of normalcy. So ordinary that the very thought of magic would shatter against this mundanity. And for this mission, she needed the perfect partner. A man devoid of even a drop of imagination. Meet Vernon Dursley. A man whose neck was shorter than his ambitions, and whose mustache was wider than his worldview. He worked as a director at Grunnings. He sold drills. Think about that detail. Drills. A tool created to bore holes into solid matter. To make the world understandable, physical, rough. To us, Vernon is a boring Philistine. But to a traumatized Petunia, he was a knight in shining tweed armor. He was nauseatingly predictable. He hated anything that fell outside the norm. If he saw a person in strange clothes on the street, his mood was ruined for the whole day. This is exactly what she was looking for. An antidote to chaos. The night Petunia gathered the courage to tell him the truth about her witch sister, she was trembling. She expected him to run, but Vernon did something surprising. He didn't get scared. He pitied her. He said it wasn't her fault that she had, and I quote, "such abnormalities in her family." In that moment, their pact was sealed. Vernon took on the role of the protector of their normalcy. They believed that if they behaved correctly enough, boringly enough, magic wouldn't touch them. They created their perfect vacuum world. But a vacuum doesn't last long, especially when your sister starts dating a guy who treats the laws of physics as a joke. JK. Rowling described this episode in a short essay, but it was never shown in the movies, and that is a crime. Because it was here, at a table in an ordinary restaurant in 1977, that Harry Potter's fate was sealed. It was an attempt at reconciliation, a double date. Vernon, like a typical middle-class alpha male, decided to mark his territory immediately. He started bragging about his new car. For him, it was a symbol of success. But sitting opposite him was James Potter. James wasn't evil, but he was a spoiled hereditary wizard who had no idea about the value of Muggle money. When Vernon asked what car James drove, James started talking about the specs of his racing broom. Vernon tensed up. He decided he was being mocked. Trying to corner this unemployed magician, Vernon asked, "What do you live on?" James frivolously answered about mountains of gold left by his parents in Gringotts. For Vernon, that was the last straw. He saw before him an arrogant, lying loafer, laughing at his career and his efforts. Vernon and Petunia stood up and walked out of the restaurant. James promised a crying Lily that he would fix everything, that he would apologize next time. But James Potter was wrong. There would be no next time. The Potters weren't invited to the Dursleys' wedding. The Dursleys didn't show up to the Potters' wedding. The wall was finished. After that dinner, the Dursleys' life settled into its perfect groove. They bought the house at number 4, Privet Drive, a place where all the houses were the same. Dudley was born, their little prince, living proof that their genes had won. He was loud, demanding, and absolutely 100% non-magical. They thought they had won this war. Petunia stopped flinching at every knock on the door. Vernon believed his authority was enough to scare off any devilry. But we know what was happening outside. Beyond their perfect fence, Britain was burning. Voldemort was at the peak of his power. People were vanishing. The dark mark hung in the sky. The Dursleys saw hints. Strange owls in broad daylight. People in cloaks on street corners. News of mysterious disasters. But their reaction was phenomenal denial. Vernon didn't want to know why it was happening. He just yelled at the TV. It was an illusion of control. They built a dam out of cardboard and believed it would hold back a tsunami. They didn't know their names were already written in a prophecy. Not directly, but indirectly. That their fate was tied to the fate of a boy who couldn't even walk yet. And the scariest part of this story, they were happy. Truly happy in their ignorance. Until the evening of Halloween 1981. The morning of November 1st was cold and gray. Petunia Dursley, as usual, woke up first to put the kettle on. She opened the front door to bring in the milk bottles, and in that second, her scream woke the whole street. But it wasn't just a scream of fear. It was a scream of recognition. There was a child in the basket, and pinned to the blanket was a letter. A letter from the same man who had rejected her years ago. Albus Dumbledore. The circle had closed. She had wanted to enter this world so badly, and now this world had come to her doorstep itself. But not as a miracle, as a death notice. That morning, Petunia realized a terrible thing. Her sister was dead. Her defense had collapsed, and this child was a living bomb that would tick in their house for the next 10 years. Vernon and Petunia took him in, but they didn't do it out of love. They locked him in the cupboard not just to punish him. They were trying to hide the magic, to lock it in the darkest, tightest corner, hoping it would suffocate. The story of the Dursleys is a tragedy. It is the story of how fear of the unknown turns ordinary, boring people into jailers. They wanted to be normal so desperately that they sacrificed their humanity for it, and therein lies perhaps the most terrifying irony of the entire saga. Magic didn't make them villains. Normalcy made them villains.